The Seventh Age, the Age of Vengeance. Year 1, the War of Vengeance. Scarcely had the Witch King declared the Age of Vengeance and a new war on Ulthuan, when a vast horde of Northlanders attacked out of the Chaos Wastes. Many amongst Malekith's court counselled that he should abandon the invasion, but the Witch King had other plans. For some time he had been concerned that his armies might not be sufficient to break Ulthuan, yet his pride would not allow postponement of the attack. Now, where others feared a war on two fronts, Malekith saw only opportunity, and sent Morathi northward as emissary. To the invading chieftains, the hag sorceress brought gold, slaves, and pleasures too numerous to name. Her flesh crawled every moment she spent in their crude company, but she kept her revulsion closely guarded. Englamoured by Morathi's beauty, and ensnared by the gift she bestowed, the warlords of the north cast aside their ambitions to ransack Nagaroth, and allied with the Witch King. When the Dark Elves took ship to Ulthuan, they did so alongside a host nearly as great as their own. Black arcs beached across Nagaroth, and black-bannered hosts swiftly besieged and overwhelmed the defences of Phoenix Gate and Griffin Gate. While the fur-clad Northmen sated their desire for carnage in the lands of Illyrion, Tiranoc, and Crace, Malekith led his own host deep into the sacred forests of Avalorn. Ancient groves burned with dark fire as the Witch King's host pressed onwards in search of the Everqueen. The Witch King sought Alariel's death more than that of any other, for he knew that it would spread unquenchable dismay. Thousands of High Elves were slaughtered in battle, or else cast onto sacrificial pyres in praise to Cain and Anathema. Yet the Everqueen evaded the Witch King's gaze. Too late, Malekith learned she had escaped his onslaught, rescued by the upstart, Prince Tyrion. Furious, Malekith drove his armies all the harder, his generals eager to outdo one another and so gain their lord's favour, loosed a tide of bloodletting and destruction not seen for thousands of years. Soon all of Ulthuan was ablaze. Only at Lothern and the Tower of Hoeth were the Dark Elf armies checked in their advance. The Witch King cared not for these bastions of resistance, but gloried in the carnage wrought at his command. The one blight upon Malekith's triumph was the knowledge that the Everqueen remained at liberty, having somehow evaded all who sought her. Losing patience, the Witch King loosed 4 of his deadliest assassins, promising boundless wealth in exchange for the Everqueen's death. Ulthuan's destruction now seemed only a matter of time. Year 2, the Battle of Finuval Plain. Upon receiving news that his chosen assassins had failed to slay the Everqueen, Malekith now resorted to desperate measures. Through unholy pacts of blood and depravity, he made a bargain with Enkari, foremost amongst Slaanesh's greater demons. The Witch King had little desire to do such a thing, for even an immortal elf had no wish to draw the Dark Prince's gaze. But he rightly perceived that the Everqueen and her protector were beyond the abilities of his mortal servants. Enkari readily agreed to the Witch King's terms. The soul of an Everqueen was a sweetmeat to be valued beyond all others, and the demon had long sought revenge on Tyrion for an ignominious defeat some years earlier. As the demon departed upon his hunt, the Witch King felt a chill cross his heart and questioned, too late, the wisdom of his bargain. In the following weeks, Malekith strove to drown his doubts in blood. The fortress of Tindala he assailed with dark magic, and he watched with satisfaction as demonic tentacles tore the citadel apart, stone by stone. In Eataine, he watched as Kouran led the Black Guard to storm the Temple of Liliath and fed its priestesses to vicious war hydras. The Witch King personally captured Adran, High Commander of Calador, and oversaw his sacrifice to dread Hecate. But through it all, Malekith was ill at ease. Never had he been so close to ultimate victory, yet countless defeats had made him distrustful of beneficent fate. When voices upon the winds of magic brought news that Enkari had been banished, the Witch King took it as an omen that his invasion was in jeopardy. In that moment, Malekith was torn. Rage and hatred exhorted him to press on, to ignore the Everqueen's perplexing survival and obliterate his accursed kin. Yet, the Witch King was wiser and more calculating than when he had last brought war to Ulthuan. If this was to be his predestined hour of revenge, then so be it. But he swore the unfolding events would serve to his cause nonetheless. In the following weeks, the Witch King arranged for his most loyal generals and their troops to take ship back to Nagaroth. He took pains to conceal their departure, though those dark elves who remained on Ulthuan were so drunk with slaughter that such measures were scarcely necessary. So it was that when the High Elves marshalled their remaining strength at the Battle of Finuval Plain, they faced a dark host less than half the size of that which had first invaded Ulthuan. Though the Witch King led the army, his pride would not allow otherwise. It by now contained only a few thousand of his hand-picked warriors. Nearly a quarter of his host were warriors of chaos, the battle-scarred survivors of the invasion who now flocked to Malekith's banner and the promise of glory. The remainder were dark elves, but the soldiery of dreadlords who had fallen from Malekith's favor, and were therefore considered just as expendable as the primitives who fought beside them. At the head of the Dark Elf assault rode Urien Poisonblade, the Witch King's champion. The two armies clashed like a tide of black, engulfing a white rock. Poisonblade cut down a score of elven heroes as he sought out Prince Tyrion, who in turn claimed dozens of Dark Elf lives with his runeblade Sunfang. Malekith channeled ungodly energies to bring down fire and ruin upon his foes, whilst wrestling with Teclis's counterspells. Demons howled and gibbered as the titanic magical forces opened breaches into the realm of chaos, while, on the field, Dark Elf and High Elf blood matted the grass and transformed the ground into a crimson quagmire. Many leagues distant, Morathi watched the unfolding battle through her enchanted mirror. Malekith had striven to keep his scheme from her eyes, but, as ever, could have spared his efforts. Even the hag sorceress knew not why the battle enraptured her so. There was a certain joy to watching the besotted Northmen sacrifice themselves in her name, and an undeniable satisfaction in knowing that she would never again keep their company, but neither of these could fully explain why her eye was drawn hence. Then her gaze fell upon Poisonblade and his personal battle against some princeling. For the first time in many thousands of years, Morathi started with surprise. Impossible though it seemed, Poisonblade's foe was none other than Anarion. a younger, less careworn an Arion perhaps, and one unmarked by the trials of long ago, but her beloved nonetheless. The hag sorceress watched in horror as the princeling stumbled and Poison Blade's sword lanced out to land a killing blow. In that moment, Morathi did something that she had not done for millennia. She panicked. Instinctively reaching out into the winds of magic, she gathered up every iota of sorcerer's power and crafted it into an enchantment that would cheat Poison Blade's strike. Utterly exhausted from the effort of channeling sorcery over such a distance, she watched with relief as Poison Blade's sword glanced off his opponent's armor, and with disinterest as the Dreadlord was skewered in return. Meanwhile, on the Fenuval plain, the Witch King had more to concern himself with than Poison Blade's death. Thus far, Teclis's raw talent had given him the advantage, but Malekith had learned his black art over thousands of years, and he now brought the full weight of that experience to turn the tide. In that moment, however, Teclis called upon the power of his moonstaff and unleashed a terrible curse. Realizing his peril, Malekith turned all of his art and power to deflecting the spell, but was too slow to divert it entirely. The bolt struck the Witch King and engulfed him with its energies. No ordinary curse, this magical blast awakened the vengeance of a Suryan that still lingered within Malekith's soul and had burnt within his breast for nearly 5,000 years. The hideous burning of old raged anew through Malekith's body, searing his flesh and mind. Tormented by the god's judgment, the Witch King summoned the last of his power and hurled himself into the realm of chaos, where Asuryan's vengeance could not follow. With their lord seemingly destroyed, the Dark Elves retreated, leaving their erstwhile allies to fare however they could against the vengeful High Elves. Many Nagarothi abandoned their armor and weapons in the speed of their flight, and these the High Elves pursued mercilessly. Others maintained their discipline or fought out of sheer hate. Kouran Darkheart of the Black Guard led the core of Malekith's army to Nagaroth with a ruthless determination. Any who could not keep to his brutal pace was left to die in the dust. 3 times High Elf princes brought Kouran to battle, and 3 times he hacked their armies to red ruin, even though his own warriors were weary unto death. Yet these were small victories to set against a massive defeat. Malekith had preserved his finest warriors from destruction, but was now lost to the mortal world. Ulthuan was in ruins, but Nagaroth's future was far from certain. Year 3, the Year of Blades. Kouran returned to Nagaroth to find the capital at war, Morathi imprisoned, and no fewer than 8 dreadlords attempting to claim Malekith's seemingly vacant throne. However, Kouran refused to countenance such disloyalty. He decreed Malekith's Black Tower to be forbidden ground and enforced the order with the blades of the Black Guard. Shortly thereafter, Morathi's agents contacted Kouran. They informed him that their mistress had gone willingly into confinement, rather than grant her foes the satisfaction of an execution. The hag sorceress now watched the current confusion with amusement. She was icily certain that the Witch King would return, but determined that Nagaroth would not tear itself apart in his absence. Morathi had a deep treasury, and her chains had not prevented her dispersing it to Nagaron's various assassin cults. Prison bars could do little to restrain the hag sorceress's malice. A month later, Kouran invited the 8 vying dreadlords into the Witch King's palace. They could bring whatever weapons they wished, he said, but must come alone. The dreadlords passed through those black gates with paranoia burning bright, each bearing the scars of failed assassinations. They gathered in silence at the foot of Malekith's throne before a huge banquet that none of them would touch for fear of poison. As the dreadlords took their seats, Kouran spoke. It was entirely fit, he said, that the new ruler of the Dark Elves ascend only after proving his strength and determination. He went on to alert the pretenders to the fact that the room was now sealed, and would remain so until only one occupant remained alive. If he, Kouran, were that occupant, he would maintain the throne and the kingdom in preparation for Malekith's return. What another chose to do in the wake of victory, he cared not. At this, the pretenders took angrily to their feet, their quarrels with each other forgotten in the face of Kouran's arrogance. For his part, Kouran simply strode over to the Witch King's throne, taking care not to turn his back on the assemblage, and reclaimed his halberd, which he had left resting in shadow. An hour later, the doors to the throne room were unbolted to allow the captain of the Black Guard to exit the room. Behind him, Kouran left a chamber stained with blood and gore, yet he himself remained strangely unmarked, save for a scratch high upon his left cheek. That night, the Black Guard issued forth from the palace and flooded into the streets of Nagaroth, where they wrought great slaughter upon the families and supporters of the erstwhile pretenders. Kouran finally freed Morathi from captivity and received incomparable reward in exchange. For 6 months, Morathi and Kouran cleansed Nagaroth. Hundreds of nobles were taken in chains to Harganeth or cast upon the sacrificial pyres. Only when every last conspirator had been rooted out did Morathi head northward to Grond, leaving Kouran to serve as regent to the empty throne. Year 40, the Battle of Tordrenille. Following a string of great victories in the Season of Despair, Tullaris Dreadbringer led a force to the shores of Nagaroth. He sought to reclaim the Chalice of Cain, lost thousands of years ago during Tethlis's destruction of Anlec. For Tullaris, this was a holy mission and could be accomplished only with Cain's blessing. Dark riders and executioners roamed the hills, taking prisoners to sacrifice to the Lord of Murder. Right by bloody right, Cain led Tullaris' army on a path of slaughter westward through the Nagaroth lowlands. Finally, Tullaris stood atop the sundered strand, but there, Cain's visions ceased. After a further 2 weeks of fruitless searching, Tullaris' gorge was rising. Shadow warriors had raided nightly, killing his warriors in 2s and 3s, and still the chalice would not be found. Now, even Tullaris' dread reputation could not contain his soldiers' discontent. Twice in one evening he stilled dissent by decapitating those who questioned him. Finally, on the 15th night, the Dark Elves found their prize. Alas, that same eve, the sundered strand came under attack once more, not from shadow warriors this time, but from a glittering army under the command of the princes Tyrion and Eldir. Chariots crashed into ranks of witch elves, but the adepts of Cain cared not. Driven mad by the sight of their own blood, they hacked and clawed at the charioteers even as they died. Tullaris' executioners countercharged, their every drike blow drawing fresh blood. Seeing the slaughter, Prince Eldir of Tiranoc spurred his own chariot into the fray, his spear levelled at Tullaris' black heart. Ducking low under the spear, Tullaris cut upward with the first drike, slicing effortlessly through the chariot's carriage and sweeping the prince from his fighting platform. Eldir tried to clamber to his feet, but Tullaris sprang forward, hacking at the fallen prince with a madness born of bloodlust. Eldir was dead after the second blow. After the 10th, his corpse was unrecognizable. Seeing Eldir fall, Tyrion let loose a bellow of rage and charged toward Tullaris. Faced with a new threat, Tullaris ordered his warriors to form up behind the wall of dead and dying charioteers. It was in that moment that the Lord of Murder spoke to him, whispering through the blood that caked Tullaris head to foot. Cain told his disciple to forget victory that day. Reclaiming the chalice was all that mattered. The Lord of Murder commanded that Tullaris abandon his companions and return home with his prize. And so, Tullaris did. In the moments before Tyrion's charge struck home, Tullaris turned and left the battlefield. No elf, neither high nor dark, saw him go, for Cain's battle lust clouded their sight. As Tullaris' ship slid unseen through the waves, he looked back to see Tyrion's army tear through his erstwhile companions. Cain had fared well this day. That he had done so at the hands of the High Elves mattered not to Tullaris Dreadbringer. Year 76. The Ritual of Awakening. Employing every scintilla of artifice and sorcery, Morathi captured both Prince Tyrion and the Blighted Isle. Since Malekith's disappearance, the Hag Sorceress had become increasingly convinced that the young prince was as alike in character to his forebear as he was in form. His only failings were misplaced loyalty to Finubar and a dog-like infatuation with the harlot Everqueen. Anarion, she felt sure, would have despised Ulthuan's rulers, and this led her to believe his rebirth to be incomplete. This she could amend. If Malekith could no longer rule, Anarion would do. Morathi's scheme would not go unopposed, however. Teclis's mystical sight had made him aware of his brother's kidnap almost as soon as it had occurred. With the aid of Princess Eldria, whose father had been one of Tyrion's closest comrades, the High Lawmaster gathered an army and marched north. As the High Elves counterattacked, Morathi gave command of the army to her almost trusted acolyte, Lissa Cruelblade, and began a ritual atop the altar of Cain. Blood flowed down the sides of the shrine as the Hag Sorceress sacrificed hundreds of slaves and dozens of her sorceresses to Cain, imploring the Lord of Murder to restore her beloved's former glory. Alas for Morathi, a traitor in her ranks, later suspected to have been in the employ of Crone Hellebron, who had no desire at all to see Anarion return or Morathi's power increased, disrupted the ritual and loosed Tyrion's bonds. As the prince attempted to fight his way clear, the High Elves pierced Cruelblade's lines and forced their way to the Dark Pyramid. Even as the skeins of sorcery unraveled, Teclis and Eldria led a charge to the shrine's summit. The battle was lost, Morathi realized, and with it, her hopes of reclaiming Anarion's shattered soul. At least, for now. Before parting, she kissed Tyrion, who, lost in surprise and revulsion, squandered any opportunity to slay her. Then, summoning fateful Sulfet to her side, Morathi took flight back to Grond, leaving her followers to make whatever escape they could. Year 70. Plunder in the jungle. Having spent much of a century fruitlessly searching for a sign of Malekith's survival, Morathi resolved to tempt Kain's favor with uncommon gifts. Thus did she offer great reward to any who brought her unnatural sacrifices from the Lustrian jungles. Nagaroth's nobility scrambled to fulfill the hag sorceress's wishes, for they had no illusions as to who would choose a new ruler should the Witch King prove lost forever. So it was that ships beyond counting hastened to the Lustrian coast and the dense jungles of the interior. They launched with their decks crammed with ruthless warriors, and those few that returned did so with holds full of caged beasts. Skinks and Saurus warriors were common prizes, rendered somnolent and docile by chill sorcery. As time wore on and competition flared, ever more daring raiders seized even larger prey. Soon, coatl, bastillodons, and even larger creatures fed Morathi's sacrifices, though after a carnosaur ran bloody riot at the height of a ritual, destroying much of the temple in the process, the hag sorceress forbade another such beast be brought before her. For 12 years this went on. Thousands of dark elves perished to bring Morathi her treasures. But the sorceress had eyes only for Kain and her desperate quest. Then, one night, in the season of savagery, Morathi offered up her greatest prize, a Slan mage priest seized from Slan Shla and lobotomized by an assassin's dagger. As the bloated creature's lifeblood oozed out across the altar, the sky blazed with fire, and the walls of Grond bled with demonic ichor. The next day, Morathi ordered the Lustrian expeditions to cease. The hag sorceress had her answer. All she need do now was wait. Year 102, the Witch King's return. Having wandered long through the realm of chaos, Malekith finally clawed his way back to the world of mortals. A patrol of dark riders discovered the Witch King's broken body in the shadow of the northern watchtowers, his armored skin rent and torn. Morathi nursed her son for a year, pouring all of her vile magic and malice into his soul, that it might make him restored. In the ranting of waking nightmares, the Witch King spoke of bone castles and forests of eyes. When he awoke, Malekith's eyes burned with a new light. His raging anger was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. Morathi feared that some part of her son was still trapped in the world beyond the world, but the Witch King would not be drawn into discussion. The hag sorceress's only clue was a broken tip of demon horn the dark riders had found at Malekith's side. Year 105, vengeance renewed. Finally recovered from his travails, the Witch King began drawing new plans for Ulthuan's destruction. Summoning his corsair captains, he ordered them to focus their raids on the High Elves' far-flung colonies and those realms with which they traded. The year 108, the fall of Tor Elasor. At the Witch King's command, Lokhir Felheart led a great fleet of vessels against the far-flung High Elf colony of Tor Elasor. At dawn, the Black Ark's Tower of Blessed Dread and Immortal Agony breached the shoreward walls with a barrage of sorcerous shot, allowing corsairs to ransack the city beyond. Though the high elves within fought valiantly, they could not match their attackers' ferocity. By the time dusk fell, Tordrenille was a blood-wreathed ruin. Felheart nailed its still-breathing warden, Prince Detherion, to the uppermost wall of the central keep. So swift had the attack been that no word escaped to reach Ulthuan. When Sea Lord Aeslin led a fleet to discover the cause of Tordrenille's silence, he found the colony a charnel place of rotting flesh and rampant decay. Year 115, a lineage ended. Takon Drak, last noble scion of Har-Kaldra, was finally hunted down and slain by Malekith's assassins. Year 117, Sea Lord Aeslin's downfall. After several weeks shadowing the Black Ark Tower of Blessed Dread through the Sea of Serpents, Sea Lord Aeslin signalled his fleet to attack. Alas for the Admiral, his trap was not all that he thought. Though Aeslin's mages could conceal the high elf vessels from sight, they could not mask the telltale ripples they caused in wind and wave. To Lokhir Felheart they could scarcely have been more obvious had their ships been afire. So it was that as Aeslin's ships moved in for the kill, the great portal at the rear of the Black Ark burst into life. Sorcerous black fog flooded from its depths and slicked across the ocean, and with it came a dozen Doomreavers, iron-clad war towers bound to the scaled backs of gigantic helldrakes. Cries of warning rang out across the approaching hawkships, and the swift vessels scattered, but Felheart had timed his counterattack perfectly. The three hindmost hawkships were smashed apart by a hail of bolt-thrower fire, and the hull of a fourth was snapped like matchwood by a helldrake's tail. With a thin smile, Felheart ordered the Tower of Blessed Dread to come about and engage Aeslin's flagship, the mighty dragonship Calandirian. Aeslin should perhaps have broken off his attack at that point, but pride goaded him on. Ordering the eagle ship Isha's Mercy to battle the Doomreavers, he set the Calandirian upon a broad arc, intended to cross the Black Ark's bows and then loop abaft. As the dragon ship cut effortlessly through the water, Aeslin watched as the enchanted bolts of his eagle claws rained down across towers and battlements, unseating stones and shattering fortifications. On the Tower of Blessed Dread, Felheart laughed. Aeslin was a daring foe to bring his vessel in so close, but it would not save him. Upon the highest point of the Black Ark's central tower, a coven of Mrathi's most skilled sorceresses awaited Felheart's command. For days they had planned this moment, offering countless slaves in blood sacrifice to ensure Hecate's favor. At Felheart's signal, they reached into the roiling winds of magic, conjured a bladed cloud of crystallized hate, and sent it against the Calandirian. Across the water, the dragon ship's mages saw the sorceress attack almost as soon as it was launched, and wove their counterspells, but not quickly enough. Whilst the Doomreavers duelled with Aeslin's fleet, they had seeded assassins amongst the flotsam. Many had perished in the chill of the seas, but others had survived long enough to latch onto the Calandirian's hull as it surged past. Using scaling claws, they climbed the ship's alabaster flanks, vaulted its gun swales, and fell about the mages with wicked determination. Too late, Aeslin saw the murder upon his decks, even as he led warriors of the White Lions and the Lothern Sea Guard against the assassins. The last mage's tongue was stilled. With a burst of light, the counterspell collapsed. Moments later, the cloud of blades engulfed the dragon ship, and the decks ran red. Hundreds died as dark magic washed over the ship. Many assassins died also, swept into oblivion's embrace, with mad laughter upon their lips. Aeslin, though cut and bloodied, found shelter in the lee of the bridge, and he swore that the battle was not yet done. He had many more soldiers safe on the lower decks, and the Calandirian was still a formidable vessel of war. Then he looked up and saw that the dragon ship's sails were all but gone, torn apart by the dark magic that had engulfed his ship. With a hollow heart, he turned his gaze to the Tower of Blessed Dread. The Black Ark's weapons now lay silent, but its decks were thick with scale-cloaked warriors. As the rough waves dragged the Calandirian to a halt directly before the tower's dragon-skulled prow, scores of grapnels arced high from the Black Ark's decks and drew the two ships into a lethal embrace. Lokhir Felheart was the first to reach the Calandirian's deck, his red blades flashing to disembowel and decapitate before his boots had even found purchase on the rolling decks. In his wake came scores of his dreadblades, the most savage and merciless of his corsairs. With their ruthless captain at their head, the dreadblades scythed through the mustering ranks of Northern Seaguard, their wicked swords flashing as they drove the High Elves back. Here and there the Seaguard held firm, their nerves steadied by one of the dragon ship's officers, but one by one these anchors of resistance were silenced. The surviving assassins now passed through the raging battle like shadows, effortlessly evading the attacks directed their way and striking out with bloody precision in return. With Seaguard to his port side and his bodyguard of white lions to starboard, Sea Lord Aeslin charged into the corsairs, never once slowing his pace nor losing his footing to the heaving deck. Aiming to sever the Dark Elves' foothold, he fought his way through to where the grapnels bit into the Calandirian's flank. As assassins sprang from a hiding place below the gunswale, only to be cut in two by a mighty two-handed strike from Aeslin's longsword. The Admiral's Seaguard were dying now, cut down by curved blades or pierced by repeater handbow bolts. Protected by thicker armor and their heavy cloaks, the White Lions fared better, but they were too few to make a lasting difference. Little by little, Aeslin's warriors were whittled away, and soon the Sea Lord stood alone. The corsairs pressed in, undaunted by Aeslin's quick blade or the pile of dead at his feet, but shrank back instantly at Felheart's barked command. The tower's black-hearted captain sought the Admiral's life and would permit no other to take it. So began a duel of legend. For nearly an hour, Aeslin and Felheart fought, incinate to the screams of the dying. The Calandirian caught ablaze, yet neither gave the fires any heed. Scarce a league distant, the Isher's Mercy and her entire crew were dragged to the inky depths by a tentacled beast, yet its fate did not merit even a glance. Blow and counterblow, the defeat of the upstart foe at close hand, these had become all that mattered. Both let fly with every feint at their command, but still neither could claim victory. Aeslin struck one of the red blades from Felheart's grasp. The corsair merely laughed as the sword's magic returned it to his outstretched hand, and he cut back with a double sweep that nearly sent Aeslin tumbling into the water below. Regaining his footing, the Sea Lord hacked down with all of his might, cleaving Felheart's kraken helm and slicing deep into the Dark Elf's skull. The wound healed in moments, leaving not even a scar behind, and the metal of the kraken helm rippled back together. Aeslin cut down again, this time his blade shattered into 3 pieces, but the Admiral at least had the satisfaction of seeing his opponent knocked to the ground. Taking up an axe of a fallen white lion, Aeslin advanced, but before the Sea Lord could take advantage, Felheart hamstrung a corsair and cast the wretch into Aeslin's path, Now it was the Sea Lord's turn to be knocked off balance, and he was given no chance to recover. The red blades whirling, Felheart knocked Aislin's axe aside and plunged both swords to their hilts into the Sea Lord's chest. Felheart laughed with joy as the axe fell from Aislin's nerveless fingers. Bracing one foot against the Sea Lord's ribs, the Corsair heaved the Admiral's body off his blades and over the gun swale. An hour later, the Tower of Blessed Dread was underway once more, its holds full of slaves destined for Nagaroth. Of the High Elf fleet, only scattered wreckage remained. Of Aislinn, there was no trace. Year 118, the taming of Bretonnia. Having observed the realms of Ulthuan and Bretonnia making common cause on several occasions, the Witch King determined that the human kingdom should be punished. Sending emissaries to the beastmen of the Forest of Arden and the greenskins of the massive Orcal, Malekith stirred up such carnage that King Charlene was forced to leave many coastal fortresses undefended to quell the tumult in his heartlands. With the armies of Bretonnia distracted, the Dark Elves rampaged across its northern coast. Towns and villages burned by the score, their defenders were slaughtered, and their peasants were shipped north to slave in Nagaroth. Liangil, greatest of Bretonnia's ports, was left in ruins, the mutilated dead splayed across its streets. The Witch King was pleased. It would be some time before the Knights of Bretonnia would have strength to spare in a cause not their own. Year 125, the sack of Evress. Outraged by Eltharion's sacking of Nagarond, the Witch King ordered reprisals against Evress. With its heartland under attack by Warg Grom, the realm could muster only a token defense. By the time aid arrived from Kothic, the Dark Elves had withdrawn, leaving ruin in their wake. Year 152, the night of pleasure and pain. At the height of the season of decadence, when the rites of Atharti, goddess of pleasure, were at their excessive peak, the Witch King brooded in his tower. Desire for vengeance had long ago burnt away his desire for gratification, and Malekith spent the eve plotting his next masterstroke. However, as the minutes passed, the Witch King became aware that something was amiss. The screams were now somehow more desperate, the laughter darker and even more tormented. Walking to his chamber's iron balcony, the Witch King looked down into the tangle of dark streets and saw what he had suspected. The anarchy was no longer that of revelry, but of battle. Demons were loose in Nagaroth, drawn by the Knight's indulgences. No, that was not quite true, the Witch King corrected himself, catching sight of a broken-horned keeper of secrets. This was an attack born not out of opportunism, but of revenge, for none other than Ankari led the host. The Witch King drummed his fingers on the balcony's edge and watched the unfolding battle with interest. Hordes of demonettes capered in the greater demon's wake, laughing merrily as their wicked claws lashed out, but now there was slaughter on both sides, for the city guard had mobilized. Demonettes tumbled to the cobblestones, ichor gushing from spear and bolt wounds. Only when Ankari strutted did the Dark Elves know defeat, for no shield could offer defense against this elegant brute. Malekith watched with approval as, little by little, the Dark Elves yielded the streets, seeking more favorable ground. Each withdrawal left a tide mark of dead and dying, where a spear wall had made its stand. There was still no end to the demons, the Witch King saw, though he could not determine from where the reinforcements came. Presumably the mansion of some foolish wretch whose observances to Atharti had gone too far, Malekith supposed. The spear walls now held the entrances to the Grand Concourse directly below the Black Tower, and Malekith noted with approval that Kouran had taken command. Minutes earlier, the captain of the Black Guard had been praising Etharti with as much joyous abandon as any of Nagaron's folk, but this would have been impossible to guess from his clear-eyed demeanor. At Kouran's order, the spear walls threw the demonettes back from their shields, then turned and fled into the concourse. Sensing victory, the demonettes let loose a shriek of pure joy. The demons dashed forward into the concourse, only to be scythed down in their hundreds as the war machines upon the palace walls opened fire. Now the demons flooded into a three-sided trap. On the far side of the concourse, the spear walls reformed, their ranks thickened by fresh troops. Along the concourse, from the 9 gates of the city, rode dark riders and cold one knights, their spears and lances gleaming darkly under the stars. Down the great basalt steps of the Witch King's tower swept the Black Guard of Nagaroth. Demonettes were skewered by lances and beheaded by halberds, but still they came on. Fiends skittered across the concourse, only to be obliterated by doom bolts cast by sorceresses hidden in serried ranks. Mounted demonettes, too swift to target, vaulted over the ranks of the Black Guard and onto the steps beyond. As they did so, assassins appeared amongst the Black Tower's colonnades to end the demons' threat with poisoned blades. Yet still, the demons came on. Enkari hung back, but 2 other Keepers of Secrets now joined the battle, scattering the Dark Elves like broken dolls. High above the fray, Malekith's fingers ceased their play. He had allowed this charade to continue out of amusement, and so that the weaklings might be purged from his warriors' ranks, but it was now well past time that he intervened. Gathering his cloak, he stalked from his chamber and began the long descent to the streets. He did not run. Bad enough that the Witch King was forced to intercede, he would not also be put to the indignity of haste. Malekith did not so much as break stride as he joined the battle. With a flick of his fingers, he sent a wave of black fire through the demonettes who beset the spear walls, filling the air with the rancorous stench of charred demon flesh. After another few steps, Malekith pointed his arm towards a Keeper of Secrets and clenched his iron fist. The beast bellowed in agony as every bone in its unholy body snapped at once. With that, the momentum of the demon's attack was broken, and the Black Guard pushed deeper into the concourse. There, they trapped a second Keeper of Secrets against a statue of Cain and hacked it apart. It was then that Enkari bellowed and charged directly at the Witch King. The demon cared not for the outcome of the battle. He had engineered this slaughter merely to claim Malekith's corrupt soul. Without a word, the Black Guard moved to block the Keeper of Secrets' onset, but Enkari was the mightiest of his kind, and would abide no obstacle. A glancing blow sent Kouran flying. Other elves were trampled to bloody ruin beneath the demon's hooves or pulverized by the impact of its monstrous fists. With a triumphant howl, Enkari pushed on through to personally confront Malekith on the steps of the Black Tower. As the greater demon closed with him, Malekith laughed for the first time in many long centuries. When he had last fought Enkari, it had been beneath the walls of the Marcher Fortress, in the realm of chaos. There, the demon had been at the peak of its powers, whilst the Witch King had been near death. Now the tables were turned, and Malekith was determined to take his own revenge. The Keeper of Secrets did not slow as he approached Malekith, but lowered his head and charged, seeking to impale the Witch King on his remaining horn. In response, Malekith sent a dark fire to stagger and blind the demon. As Enkari thundered past, Malekith darted to one side, a savage backswing from his sword destroyer, cutting deep into the demon's flesh. Enkari bellowed in pain and turned to face his prey, claws slashing out. Malekith retreated across the steps, the destroyer flashing as he parried each strike. Again and again he sent black flame against the greater demon, but this time Enkari was prepared, and the fire spattered off hastily raised magical defenses. Malekith now fought with his back to the colonnade. Enkari struck out once more, but the Witch King ducked low. The blow shattered the ancient stonework behind, sending rubble flying in all directions. Taking advantage of Enkari's momentary confusion, the Witch King hefted the destroyer's black blade and pressed the attack with a flurry of knife-quick blows. With each strike, the destroyer glowed dully as it sapped the demon's magical lifeblood. Weakened, Enkari stumbled and bellowed in pain as the destroyer lunged to pierce his shoulder. With one last effort, the greater demon rose to his feet, his lower arms whipped out once more, and this time Malekith was too slow. Enkari's vice-like hands clamped about the Witch King's shoulders, pinioning his arms and the destroyer to his sides. Enkari leered with sadistic joy as he heaved the struggling Witch King from the ground. His serpent tongue flickered out to caress his captive's armored cheek, leaving a trail of foul-scented drool in its wake. When a handful of black guard charged up to the steps to their master's aid, Enkari gestured lazily with a claw and sent a cloud of magical shards to tear the flesh from their bones. As their lifeless bodies crumpled, the greater demon brought his other claw up and clamped it around Malekith's armored throat. With a last, lingering smile, Enkari began to squeeze, but the Witch King was not yet done. For the last few moments he had marshaled his sorcery, and now he unleashed it in a single display of devastating power. A bolt of black lightning arced from the sky and smashed into the greater demon, shattering his defenses and wreaking ruin upon his flesh. As Enkari staggered with the impact, Malekith burst free of his grasp. Before the demon could recover, he brought the destroyer around in a mighty two-handed blow that severed Enkari's foul head. Thus did Malekith deliver Nagaroth. Though the demonettes would surely have fought on, Enkari's death upset the balance of magics that allowed their reinforcements to reach the mortal world. Seeing their foes' numbers slacken, the Dark Elves found fresh strength. Shouting praises to Cain and to Malekith, they swept through the bloody streets and did not rest their blades until all the demons were slain. At the battle's end, Malekith stood before the Black Tower and proclaimed that, in victorious celebration, the rites of Atharti would continue for another day and night. The Witch King then strode to the temple and gave Enkari's headless corpse as offering. He could think of no greater tribute to the goddess of delights than the body of a vanquished pleasure demon. Year 168, the Crusade of Blood. In this year, Crone Hellebron proclaimed a holy war of slaughter in Cain's name. With Tullaris Dreadbringer as her champion, she set out from Harganeth at the head of a great host of witch elves and travelled through each of Nagaroth's chief cities. Murder followed in her wake, and every day that passed, more Cain-touched elves flocked to her grim banner. When Hellebron returned to Harganeth and took ship to the primitive eastward lands, her army boasted thousands of warriors from all walks of Dark Elf society. By the time the ships made landfall on the shores of Bretonnia, Hellebron's crusade had shrunk to nearly half its initial size. The voyage had been long, and Cain ever thirsty, so each night the weakest on each ship had been sacrificed to maintain the Lord of Murder's favour. Undeterred, Hellebron drove her army southward, slaughtering all who stood in her path. At the Battle of Nouvion, she crushed the army of Duke de Bastal, and that night the cauldrons of blood were filled to the brim with the life essence of damsels and Grail knights. Onwards they drove through the border princes and the Badlands, and there was never a shortage of blood to fuel the rites. Indeed, as soon as the Crusade crossed into the Badlands, Orc tribes for leagues around swarmed to test their might. But their primitive gods were not so strong as Cain. One by one, each Wa was broken, and the vile blood of its warriors pledged to the Lord of Murder. Before long, Hellebron wished to return to Nagaroth, her ships laden with the spoils of victory. However, Tullaris Dreadbringer sought to carry his master's name through other lands, and to fresh glories. Some of the Crusade's followers took ship with Hellebron once more, but most pledged themselves to Tullaris' side and headed south into the dead land of Nehekara. At first, Tullaris' army met with success, and for weeks defeated each desiccated army the Tomb Kings sent forth. But whilst Nehekara was a land rich in many things, fresh blood could not be counted amongst them. Starved of sacrifice and worship, Cain withdrew his blessings, and the tide of battles swiftly turned in the Tomb King's favour. Too late, Tullaris turned his army north, harried every step of the way by burrowing constructs and relentless charioteers. Finally, the exhausted Dark Elves reached Nehekara's northern border and the prospect of respite. Alas, the Tomb Kings were hard on their heels, and Tullaris needed to win one last battle if he was to have any hope of escape. Thus did Tullaris Dreadbringer make one last glorious dedication, sacrificing half of his army so that the survivors would once again know Cain's blessing. Caked in their comrades' blood and chanting praise to the Lord of Murder, the last of the Crusade's warriors went down into the sands of Nehekara to claim one more victory in Cain's name. Year 172, Battle of Blood and Gold. Seeking to further her understanding of the Old One's power, Morathi forged a pact with the vampire pirate Lokhir Felheart, and together they launched an attack on the temple city of Chock-a-Block's. As Harkon's undead hordes held back Chock-a-Block's furious defenders, Morathi's warriors ransacked the sacred cloisters, recovering not only wondrous artifacts of impossible age, but enough conventional wealth to fill 3 black arks. Alas for Harkon, he argued too strongly for possession of one of the artifacts, a chest of black pearls, each glimmering with barely contained power. Displeased by the vampire's peremptory demands, Morathi double-crossed her ally and left him sealed in one of Chock-a-Block's treasure vaults, an unexpected gift for the temple city's outraged inhabitants. Year 183, a game of Reavers. In this year, the Corsair captains Lokhir Felheart and Dastan Coldeye challenged one another to a contest of plunder. Each chose a province of the Empire, Ostland in Felheart's case, and Nordland in Coldeye's, and each had a year to claim whatever bounty they could. Coldeye swiftly took the lead, thanks largely to the presence of an Empire fleet, its holds bursting with stolen Nehekaran treasures at Anchor and Deb Nights when his corsairs descended. Felheart was not so easily bested, however, and drove his crews mercilessly until there was neither village nor town in northern Ostland that had not learned to fear his crews. Nonetheless, as year's end approached, Felheart still lagged behind, so he did what any Dark Elf does in this situation. He cheated. Felheart sent word to King Akateph of Zandri, informing him of the stolen Nehekaran treasures that now lay in Coldeye's possession. Akatep's reaction was everything Felheart could have wished for, and soon Cold Eye's Black Ark was pursued, harried, and ultimately sunk by a fleet of Xandrian war dhows. Cold Eye survived that battle, but with his vessel gone and his treasure taken by Akatep's fleet, he had to cede the contest. At the next high moon, he and his immediate family were sacrificed to Mathlan and Loak, for Felheart knew full well that his victory could not have been achieved without the consent of the god of the sea and the god of deception. Year 194, the Siege of Barak Var. No fewer than 5 Black Arks sailed down the Black Gulf and blockaded the dwarf hold of Barak Var. Outnumbered and overmatched, King Gunderdrak ordered his folk and their vessels of war to retreat behind the Great Sea Gates. On this occasion, however, the Dark Elves did not seek the hold's destruction. Indeed, they were well content with their tithe of prisoners, who would soon be put to work in Nagaroth's mines. Year 214, a Drakvalt betrayal. Acting on information from the Witch King's spies, Draxor Bloodscar, Dreadlord of Casnakor, intercepted an army of High Elves as it marched to aid the Emperor Karl Franz against the Drakvalt Beastmen. Having successfully ambushed the High Elves several leagues short of their destination, Bloodscar ordered a glamour woven around his warriors so that their appearance matched those of their most recent victims. 3 days later, Bloodscar's warriors took the field alongside Karl Franz. To begin with, the Dark Elves bided their time, slaying beastmen as was expected of them. Only when the Reichlanders were fully committed did Bloodscar order the Veil of Illusion dropped, and the Dark Elves to turn upon their erstwhile allies. Within moments, the Empire lines were in anarchy. State troops who, moments before, had thought their flank held by White Lions, died as executioners descended hungrily upon them. Knights Panther fought desperately against Phoenix Guard, whose robes had turned black as ash, even as their faces grew malevolent. Betrayed, savaged, and surrounded, the Empire army turned tail and fled. Karl Franz sought to restrain the rout, but his Reichsguard captain judged the battle to be lost, and dragged the Emperor from the field. Laughing at the monarch's undignified retreat, Bloodscar turned and ordered his warriors to break the beastman horde. Slaves were slaves, after all, and there was no reason a beast of the Drakvalt could not labor as well as a man of Reichland. Year 218, the Withering of Kothik. With the High Elves distracted by Tullaris Dreadbringer's newest assault on the Blighted Isle, Shadowblade led a coterie of assassins through Nagaroth and Crace, coming at last to Kothik. There they poisoned the rivers with a noxious brew of manbane and demonic ichor. Before long, Kothik was in the grip of a crippling plague for which no cure could readily be found. Year 222, the fall of Arnheim. No longer content to tolerate the presence of High Elves on Nagaroth shores, the Witch King led an assault on the port of Arnheim, obliterating it. Year 223, the dawn of a new age. After long years of preparation, the Witch King now unleashed the full might of his armies against Ulthuan once again. For centuries, he had undermined and harried the High Elves, breaking their colonies overseas and isolating them from potential allies. Now, Malekith deemed it was time for his works to bear bitter fruit. All through the season of blood, the moons had shone with the light of slaughter, and there was no truer sight of Cain's favour. All along the Nagarothi coast, Black Arks slipped their moorings and sailed east. The hour of the Witch King's triumph was finally at hand.